Did you know Brazil once changed its white jersey because of a single match? And did you know there was a World Cup game where Brazil needed only a draw to become champions, yet that same match turned into the greatest heartbreak in the country's football history? In 1950, before the final match had even kicked off, Brazil already felt like world champions. The Maracana was packed with hundreds of thousands of people. Victory headlines were almost ready. An entire nation was waiting to celebrate. Because the math was simple. Brazil did not need to win. They only needed a draw to lift the World Cup. So the question is, how did a match Brazil was never supposed to lose become a wound the country would carry for generations? The 1950 World Cup was not just another football tournament. It was the first World Cup after a 12-year break. The world had just survived the destruction of World War II, and football, once again, was becoming a symbol of normal life returning. For Brazil, hosting the tournament meant much more than organizing a sporting event. It was a chance to present themselves to the world as a proud, modern, football-loving nation. And standing at the center of that dream was the Maracana Stadium in Rio de Janeiro. Maracana was not just a stadium, it was a statement, a monument to Brazil's ambition, a place built to witness glory. And on the pitch, Brazil looked unstoppable. They crushed Sweden 7-1, then destroyed Spain 6-1. They were playing with confidence, flair, and power. By the time the final match arrived, it felt less like a challenge and more like a coronation. Their final opponent was Uruguay. Now, Uruguay were not a weak side. They had won the very first World Cup in 1930. They were experienced, disciplined, and dangerous. But in July 1950, almost all the attention was on Brazil. The crowd, the newspapers, the atmosphere, everything pointed to one ending. Because the math was simple. Brazil did not need to win. They only needed a draw to lift the World Cup. So the question is, how did a match Brazil was never supposed to lose become a wound the country would carry for generations? On 16 July 1950, the Maracana filled with people. Officially, more than 173,000 spectators were inside the stadium. Many believe the real number was closer to 200,000. Whatever the exact figure was, one thing is certain. This was not just a football crowd. This was a nation showing up to witness its own triumph. The match began. The first half ended 0-0. But the tension in Brazil was not fear, it was anticipation. They believed the goal would come, and even if it didn't, a draw was still enough. Then, just 2 minutes into the second half, it happened. Friaca scored for Brazil. The Maracana exploded. Flags waved wildly. People screamed, embraced, and jumped from their seats. The dream was no longer close. It felt real. In that moment, Brazil looked like champions. The celebration had already begun in the hearts of the crowd. But history is often cruelest when people believe the ending has already been written. Uruguay did not collapse. They stayed calm. They waited. And in the 66th minute, Juan Schiaffino scored the equalizer. Now it was 1-1. For a moment, the stadium lost some of its certainty. The joy was still there, but something had changed. The first crack had appeared in Brazil's confidence. Still, Brazil were fine. A draw was enough. They were still champions, at least for now.
If you enjoy true stories like this, where a football match carries the weight of an entire nation's pride, fear, and heartbreak, then take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because history's most unforgettable stories did not always happen on battlefields. Sometimes they happened in stadiums like this. Then came the 79th minute. Uruguay's Alcides Giguia broke down the right side. He slipped past the Brazilian defense and struck the ball low. It hit the net. Uruguay 2, Brazil 1. And then the Maracana fell silent. A stadium that had been built for celebration became a place of shock. Hundreds of thousands of people, all expecting glory, suddenly had no words, no songs, no cheers, just disbelief. The final whistle came soon after. Uruguay were world champions, and Brazil had not simply lost a football match, they had lost a moment they believed already belonged to them. That defeat would become known as Maracanazo, the blow of the Maracana. But the damage did not end with the scoreline. Brazilian goalkeeper Moacir Barbosa would carry the blame for years. And one of the most symbolic consequences of that defeat was something many people still remember today. Brazil's white jersey slowly became a symbol of failure. So yes, back to the question from the beginning. When did Brazil change their white jersey, and why? Because after the trauma of 1950, that white shirt no longer felt like the shirt of champions. It felt tied to humiliation, silence, and a memory the country could not escape. Eventually, Brazil adopted a new identity, the now iconic yellow jersey, which would go on to become one of the most famous football shirts in history. And yet, even after winning 5 World Cups, even after producing legends like Pelé, even after becoming the most successful football nation on earth, Brazil never truly forgot 16 July 1950. Because some defeats do not stay inside sport, they become part of a nation's memory. Years later, Giguia famously said that only 3 people had ever silenced the Maracana: the Pope, Frank Sinatra, and himself. It sounds arrogant, but when you look at what happened that day, he may not have been wrong. Because on that afternoon, it was not just a stadium that went silent. It was Brazil. What do you think? Was this the most heartbreaking defeat in football history? Let me know in the comments.